Every single angler at some point in their journey picks up one of these, and that is a spinning reel. Regardless of the species of fish you're targeting, a spinning reel can get the job done and has for over a century. But even though the spinning reel is known for its simple build and lack of complexity, there are still ways you can misuse and mistreat a spinning reel that can take what once was a fantastic fishing day and cause it to start spinning out of control. So in today's video, I'm gonna teach you 5 best practices for fishing with a spinning reel. That way you can become a better angler today using this thing right here, no matter how long you've been at it. My name's Tyler, and let's talk about it.
Another giant. Look at that, y'all.
I can't believe what I just caught.
Yes!
Well, what's going on, folks, and welcome back to TRF. Hey, today's video is brought to you by my merch brand called Infinite Outdoors. I am a person of faith. I believe in a God who loves us infinitely, an infinite amount of love, as NFNT stands for, that he would send his one and only son to die on the cross for us. And so if you want a clothing line that represents the infinite love of God, but also the infinite possibilities of making memories in the outdoors, hunting, fishing, hiking, backpacking, all kinds of ways to make infinite memories, that's what Infinite Outdoors is all about. I've got awesome hats, sun shirts, sweatshirts, stickers, who doesn't love stickers, and everything else at infiniteoutdoors.com. Make sure you check it out. It's one of the best ways to help support the channel and get yourself an awesome piece of clothing. I will have it linked down in the video description. Now, let's talk about tip number 1, best practice when it comes to fishing a spinning reel. And that best practice is when you're fishing a spinning reel, I know it's so easy to cast out there and just start cranking this thing, but that is not how these things are designed. It will damage your spinning reel. I'm telling you, over time, I've seen it happen over and over, if you do not manually click over the bail with your hand. Sometimes you can actually kind of force it over, but I'm telling you guys, if you want your spinning reels to last a long time, I know it might seem like a no-brainer to a lot of you guys out there, but I've seen it over and over again. Do not use the handle. See, it worked that time, but if you don't get it right like that, it ends up kind of grinding the gears and can actually end up damaging your reel. So just for the longevity of it, cast it out there and then click it over. And while we're at it, if you're fishing your spinning rod, oftentimes as a beginner fisherman or even advanced, you're fishing stuff that's on the bottom, a drop shot, a Texas rig, a jig, and you need it to fall to the bottom anyways. And so don't be in such a rush to click that thing over. Give it a cast out there, as I'll reel in my drop shot right here. Give it a simple cast and just leave it open. Let your bait fall on a slack line, and then when you're sure it's at the bottom, of course for bottom contact baits, then hand click it over with the hand that's not holding the rod, and then start your retrieve. Best practice number 2 when it comes to a spinning rod is that you want to find the best grip that works for you, depending on, of course, the rod you're using and the reel you're using and how they fit together. Some of them have longer grips up front, some have longer grips in the back, some have no grip up front at all. This one here has a little bit of wind grip in front of where the reel handle is. Some have just a simple clamp that screws down the reel. But again, you want to find the best grip for you. For some people, that is 1 finger behind, some that's 2, some that is 3, and some, actually, matter of fact, don't do that. The number 1 thing I'll say about a spinning reel is that if I'm gonna cast out there and start my retrieve, do not hold it back here. And goodness gracious, don't hold it back here. Not only does that look horrible, I feel like I saw an ad for like Bass Pro or Academy one time where they had the person holding it like this. And that is almost as bad as holding it like this. So if you do hold it like that, please take this video as your example. This is not how a spinning rod is meant to be held. That's more like a bait caster. It's meant to be underneath. I'm pretty sure Theo Vaughn, the world famous comedian, I think he actually holds his spinning reels like this. Even having it down with your hand behind, you just have no leverage. So your wrist is easy to break if you hook a fish that is strong. And so you want to either split any of your fingers with the spinning reel, not the handle, whatever this thing is sticking down here, the trigger, or you want to have everything up above. Now, is there an actual right way to hold this thing? Not really. As long as it's not totally behind, you're pretty much good to go. 3 different pro anglers I found on YouTube that I'm good friends with, they all hold it 3 different ways. Professional angler Scott Martin, he holds it where the trigger splits his ring finger and his middle finger. Brandon Palaniuk holds it 1 more above, where it splits his pinky and his ring finger. Brian Latimer fishes all 4 in front. And so really, you just got to find whatever grip feels best for you that you can get a good hook set with and have good leverage when you're fighting a fish. For me, my first position when I grab a spinning reel naturally is going to be in between my pinky and my ring finger. But again, you got to find what works for you. Just for sure, don't do this. Don't do this. And don't do that. Now, moving on to best practice number 3 has to do with the actual drag on your spinning reel. Now, a spinning reel, and let me grab a bait caster to show you the difference here. A bait caster drag, most of the time, is going to be totally silent. Let me back down the star drag here. And if I pull up the line here, it is totally silent. A spinning reel is not silent. This is what it sounds like. And I love the fact that a spinning reel has an actual drag sound, because you know the drag is being engaged. Hopefully you're fighting a big fish, but it tells you whether your drag is too loose or too tight. Now, if it's too tight, you're not gonna feel the fish pulling drag at all. And if it's too loose, it's gonna have a higher pitched sound as it's coming out easier. That compared to, see, it's a lower pitch. And something that expert anglers do that I've learned to do over the past few years is to use your drag dynamically. That is this best practice right here. So most of the time, if I'm fishing a spinning rod, it's going to be finesse tactics. So here, I've got a drop shot on, I fish a shaky head, a wacky rig, a jig head minnow. Most of the time, on my line setup, which is actually gonna be a different best practice, we'll talk about that here in a second, I have my drag relatively tight. So when I get a bite and I lean into that fish, it is not slipping hardly at all. If it does slip, it's just kind of a zzz. And what that does is allows me to get a good strong hook set into that fish. It slips a little bit if that fish fights back immediately. But then the thing that I do, again, that is using your drag dynamically, is I will, as I'm fighting that fish, I will loosen my drag with the other hand. And I know it takes some practice to get good at, but I'm telling you, if you set the hook with a tighter drag and then loosen it during the fight, you're going to hook more fish, and then as they get closer to the boat, closer to the bank, you're gonna land a whole lot more fish. I use this dynamic drag technique in my bass boat, on the kayak, and of course on the bank when I'm using a spinning reel. If you don't know how to dynamically use your drag, you should start today. Now, best practice number 4 with a spinning reel, I mentioned it a second ago, and that is the line that you use. Now, I understand you may be watching this video and you may not be a solely bass fisherman, and that is okay. This video is for you as well, but I really think for the majority of anglers out there, this line setup is what you need, and that is a braid main line to some kind of a resin leader. This here is a 12-pound Seaguar fluorocarbon leader, and this is a 15-pound Seaguar braided line. I have been fishing for over 20 years, and I have not found a combination that casts as far, that the main line lasts as long, and catches me as many fish as a braid to a fluorocarbon leader. So I don't care if you're crappie fishing, walleye, bass, perch, whatever, giant catfish, it is best to go, maybe even saltwater, with a braid. Actually, matter of fact, for sure saltwater, to go with a braided line as your main to a resin leader using a connection knot like the FG, the Alberto, or the double uni. And one side tip about this line setup is that if you go straight braid on your spinning reel, especially a bigger spool, this here is, I believe, a 300 or 3000 size. If you go any bigger than that, you're gonna be using a lot of braid that probably is never gonna see the light of day unless you're fishing for giant fish that have the possibility of spooling you or getting close to spooling you. And so for your average freshwater fish or smaller saltwater fish, do a backing, maybe a cheap monofilament line underneath your braid, and then put on 100, 150 yards of braided line, then to your fluorocarbon or monofilament leader. That way you're not wasting a whole bunch of money on braid that'll never see the light of day, because you wanna have as full of a spool as you can, but you don't want to waste a whole lot of money. So I'm just telling you guys, braid on your spinning reels casts so much further than a straight monofilament or a straight fluorocarbon. You're going to have a whole lot less problems with wind knots, and of course your line is going to last so much longer and not have any memory, as braid gets no memory. So I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but I promise you guys, braid on a spinning rod is the way to go. And the final best practice, number 5, is going to be about casting and being aware of what the line actually looks like on your spool. So you can cast it out there and just let it go, free spool. That's absolutely fine. But as you get into your fishing journey, whether you're fishing saltwater, flipping a live minnow or a live mullet underneath docks for snook, or you're skipping underneath boat docks for bass, or underneath an overhanging tree, or you're just trying to be accurate with your wacky rig or your crankbait down the bank, you can start to learn to use your opposite hand that's not casting the rod to kind of feather the spool, almost like you do with a bait caster. On a bait caster, when I go back to cast, I'm keeping my thumb on the spool to kind of feather it the entire time. What I mean by feather is you barely touch it. That way, if any kind of backlash happens, I can stop it. But the main reason is because I want to have control as to when my lure stops and where it stops, and by keeping your thumb on it, that's how you do that. But a spinning rod is a bit different. You can't really use your thumb. And just to show you, if I cast out there, you can't really use your thumb like that, and so you have to use your opposite hand Again, do you have to? No, but I think it's a best practice everybody should learn how to do, and that is just to keep your non-dominant hand here, your reeling hand, just kind of on the spool a little bit, just like this. And I stopped it right where I wanted to with my pointer finger, but I was kind of using all the rest of my 4 fingers here, even my thumb sometimes, as the line kind of passes around it to feather it, as I talked about, and stop it exactly where I want. Now, one thing to be aware of, like I talked about, kind of a 2-for-1 tip here, is on a spinning reel, especially if you are casting out there and retrieving something off the bottom and down on the bottom, off the bottom, you're reeling in slack line. What can happen is, I'm going to try to make it happen, your line can kind of form a loop on top of the spool, just like that right there, and then you're reeling in on top of that loop. And what can happen there, potentially, not every time, but sometimes, especially if the loop is big, is as you make your next cast, it can clear that out, or your line, as it's spooling itself off as you make the cast, can actually grab that loop, and what happens is it'll grab it, and you'll have one line going out, and then it will grab this loop and cause 2 more lines, just like that, to make their way out of the spool, and all of a sudden you have 3 lines, all kinds of twisted, and that's at least what I call here on a spinning rod a wind knot, and oftentimes there is no getting out of that one. You just have to cut down into your spool and get rid of all that line. And so if you do happen to notice that as you're reeling in, dang, I've got a loop on top of my spool, or sometimes underneath the spool, do not make your next cast at least very hard. Kind of do a lob cast out there, and then hand peel, as I'm doing here, until the knot here is out of the spool, and then I'm going to kind of use my fingers to loosely get that knot out. And with enough pulling, you can get that knot totally out and you are ready to go. But if you got in a hurry and or were not paying attention, you're gonna get a horrible wind knot. And that is not a spinning reel best practice. So that right there was 5 spinning reel best practices. Hopefully it made you a more confident angler to go out there and catch more bass. Now, if you also have a bait caster or you wanna get into fishing with a bait caster, I made a video all about the best bait caster practices. I will leave that up here in the corner. It's clickable. The exact rods and reels I love to use will be linked down in the video description if you wanna check them out. My name's Tyler. As always, it's a pleasure, and we'll see you guys next time right here on TRF.